afternoon edition of Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kwon Jang-ho. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has returned to Pyongyang after a two-day trip to Beijing. Not only did he meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping, but North Korean state media revealed that he spent time visiting local state infrastructure facilities. This not only shows the continuing resurgence of friendly ties between the two sides, but also points further towards economic cooperation. All this while so far North Korea has shown no steps towards denuclearization and further talks with Washington have yet to take place. We'll discuss the implications of these developments with a guest in the studio later, but first we start the show from our news centre where Devon Whiting has the latest news updates at this hour. Devon?
Hi, Jang-ho. South Korean President Moon Jae-in is on his way to Moscow this afternoon for a three-day state visit and a summit with President Vladimir Putin. It's the first state visit there by a South Korean leader in almost 20 years. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun has a rundown of the president's itinerary.
At the invitation of his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, this is the first time a sitting South Korean president has made an official state visit to Russia in 19 years. During his stay, President Moon will deliver a speech before the State Duma, the lower house of Russia's Federal Assembly, becoming the first South Korean president ever to do so. He will meet with Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, sit down for a one-on-one with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, and attend a state dinner. President Moon will also meet with South Koreans living in Russia as well as with businessmen from both countries. After completing his itinerary in Moscow, President Moon will fly to the southwestern city of Rostov-on-Don to cheer on South Korea in their World Cup match against Mexico. And that's where he'll wrap up his two-night stay, the first official state visit to Russia by a South Korean leader since 1999. According to the Blue House, President Moon's visit will strengthen friendship and trust between Seoul and Moscow and thereby expand practical cooperation with Russia, which is at the center of the Moon administration's New Northern Policy. The New Northern Policy is one of the Moon administration's key diplomatic policies to expand South Korea's diplomatic and economic horizon with its Eurasian neighbors. Seeking Russia's cooperation and active role in the denuclearization process of the Korean peninsula will also be a significant task.
As the Korean peninsula moves towards denuclearization and peace is developed, we anticipate President Moon's visit to serve as an opportunity to strengthen strategic communication and collaboration between South Korea and Russia, and boost practical cooperation and peaceful prosperity in Northeast Asia.
The last time President Moon visited Russia was to participate in the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok last September. It will be the third time for Moon and Putin to meet in person since President Moon took office in May 2017. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
In Washington, meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton says North Korea faces a decisive and dramatic choice, whether it'll give up its nuclear weapons. Not only its nukes, but its chemical weapons and ballistic missiles. And he says America will be watching closely for concrete steps by the regime. Park Ji-won has more.
In an interview with Fox News on Wednesday, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is facing a critical decision. He told Fox and Friends that U.S. President Trump made it very clear to Kim Jong-un that he faces a decisive and dramatic choice on whether North Korea is prepared to give up its nuclear weapons program as well as its chemical weapons and ballistic missiles. He added if North Korea does give up such weapons, the regime can have a very different future. Bolton stressed that Pyongyang has said it would give up its weapons programs, and the U.S. will find out soon whether the North has made that strategic decision when U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo holds meetings with North Korean officials. The U.S. National Security Advisor also said North Korea should make the first move to show its sincerity about complete denuclearization. He added that President Trump does not intend to repeat the mistakes of past administrations and has no interest in lengthy and delayed talks. Bolton said until the U.S. sees real evidence and concrete steps toward denuclearization, all the current international sanctions will remain in place, adding the U.S. will watch very closely to see whether the North's actions follow its words. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
President Trump says North Korea has handed over the remains of 200 U.S. troops missing from the Korean War. though that hasn't been confirmed by military authorities. Trump was speaking on Wednesday at a campaign-style rally in Minnesota, saying the remains had been sent back the same day. The Washington Post reported Wednesday, citing a U.S. official, that more than 250 sets of remains would be transferred in the next day or two, likely to the U.S. Air Force Base in Osan, south of Seoul. The official said there would be a ceremony led by the commander of U.S. Forces Korea, General Vincent Brooks, and then the remains would be sent to a Defense Department lab in Hawaii for identification. The remains would be commingled, according to the official, so if soldiers of other nationalities are identified, they'll be sent back to their home countries. The U.S. Department of Defense says close to 7,700 American service members are still classified as missing in action from the Korean War. Last week in Singapore, President Trump said the U.S. and South Korea would be suspending what he called their war games, and the allies will be discussing issues related to that when U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis visits South Korea next week. South Korea's defense ministry confirmed this morning that Secretary Mattis plans to come to South Korea next Thursday after his visit to China. The suspension of drills set for this August was officially canceled by the allies earlier this week, but no decision has been made regarding other joint exercises. Issues related to the suspension will also be on the table this Friday when Pompeo meets in Washington with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton. The South Korean government today proposed making changes to how investigative powers are allocated between prosecutors and the police. It's part of the government's goal of reforming a prosecution long seen as corrupt and as taking advantage of its authority for its own interests. Kim Min-ji has this report.
The South Korean government is looking to achieve a balance between the prosecution and police by diluting the concentration of investigative powers in the prosecution. Its proposed measures unveiled Thursday are aimed at having the prosecution and police work hand in hand, focusing on the expertise of their respective bodies. The biggest change is that the police will be given more autonomy and more responsibility during initial investigation. They will have the right to investigate as well as the authority to close a case. This means that police will be able to determine whether or not to pursue an indictment. Under the current system, the police can open a case but cannot close it without approval from the prosecution, while investigations by the police are required to be overseen by a prosecutor. Meanwhile, prosecutors will be able to retain their authority to indict and will be required to play a more supplementary role in overseeing probes. But they will be allowed to request reinvestigation into cases that they deem necessary or in any circumstances where the police are found to have misused their increased power. Should a case involve a prosecutor or officials from the prosecution will be required to request an arrest warrant, and the same goes for the police to ensure the two organs keep each other in check.
The proposal will see the prosecution and police break away from the vertical system so they can cooperate and each take responsibility for people's safety and protecting human rights. This will enable each body to keep either in check and step up the efficiency of investigations.
The proposal is part of the Moon Jae-in administration's goal to reform the so-called organs of power, namely the prosecutor's office, the police, and the country's intelligence agency. Calls to overhaul the prosecution have been mounting as the country has gone through a long period of irregularities that have infuriated the public. Prosecutors have been known to take advantage of their excessive power in high-profile cases of powerful people, such as politicians and business tycoons, for their own personal or financial benefit. The government has noted that the proposal will not be fully satisfactory to the prosecution or the police, saying they must put in the effort to work around the changes so that they don't spark internal feuds within their organizations. The proposal has now been passed to Parliament, where lawmakers will deliberate over the details and draw up a bill. But that's not expected to be easy, especially with a proposal still very much disputed by the parties involved and with Parliament still at standstill. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has wrapped up his third visit to China after meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, flying back to Pyongyang late Wednesday. But it turns out while he was in Beijing, he spent a fair amount of time touring the city's management and research centers, perhaps hinting at the direction that Kim intends to take his own country. Lee Ji-won has this report.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had a busy second day in Beijing. The state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday on Kim's activities, where he first met with Chinese President Xi Jinping again following their first meeting on Tuesday. The report said they met at the Diaoyu Thai State Guest House in the morning, where Kim stayed during his visit. Kim and President Xi had a one-on-one chat where they reportedly exchanged opinions on the current situation and urgent international issues. The two also discussed ways to further strengthen their strategic cooperation given the new circumstances on the Korean peninsula. Then, together with their wives, North Korea's First Lady Lee Seol-ju and Chinese First Lady Peng Liyuan, the leaders had lunch in a, quote, harmonious and family-like atmosphere, through which the North's news agency highlighted the deep friendship the two first couples share. After bidding farewell to President Xi and his wife, Kim then toured some of Beijing's research and transportation management centers. His first stop was the Academy of Agricultural Sciences, where he was accompanied by Cabinet Premier Park Bong-ju and Park Tae-sung, the Workers' Party's vice chairman for science and education. The report explained how the academy does research on the industrialization of agriculture and that Kim toured various research centers asking questions about their experience and achievements. Perhaps thinking about implementing the findings in North Korea, Kim noted how the Academy's science and technology has greatly contributed to China's agricultural development. Kim also visited the Beijing Rail Traffic Control Center, where the Chinese capital's railways and subways are controlled and managed. The state-run media report said Kim paid close attention to how the system works and said he was, quote, amazed by the excellently programmed control system. And as the final itinerary, Kim dropped by the North Korean embassy in Beijing. Expressing great satisfaction for a productive third trip to China, Kim left for North Korea late Wednesday, arriving at Pyongyang International Airport in the evening. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, to further discuss the significance of Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing, we have with us Professor Kim Han-kwon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Professor Kim, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
So Kim Jong-un is now back in Pyongyang after his trip to Beijing. But during that trip, as the report we just heard, he visited the Academy of Agricultural Sciences and the Beijing Rail Traffic Control Center, among other places. What do you make of his visit to these places? It seems like he's already laying the groundwork for economic cooperation with China.
I think it is a little early to discuss about economic cooperation between the two countries because still international society is imposing the economic sanction over the North. But we can think of it if the two countries show to the international society that the subsequent, the frequent summit between the two countries and showing their economic and strategic cooperation that can be increased the two countries' bargaining power in future negotiation with the United States. But at the same time, still the international society imposing the sanctions against the North, but China and North Korea can find a way to detour the sanctions, then they can make economic cooperation, for example, tourism and those kind of agricultural technical exchanges. So this time, I'm very interested in that the cabinet premier, Park Bong-ju, was with the chairman, Kim Jong-un. That means this time economic, the agenda can be a very important issues under the summit between the two countries.
So you're saying it's not an economic cooperation as such, but just sharing of ideas perhaps about agriculture and railways and things like that?
Yeah, because it's, if there is any the easing sanctions against North Korea that permitted by the Trump administration, that can, right after the easing, probably China and North Korea can ready for the immediate economic cooperation, especially in agricultural and railroad work.
So it's his third trip to Beijing now, and for this time he stayed longer than the last previous 2 times. He stayed an extra day and he toured different sites rather than just meet with Xi Jinping. Now that tensions in the region are subsiding, is it inevitable that North Korea is going to have a better relationship with China and vice versa?
Yes, I think so, because as I told you earlier, that if the two countries showing the economic and strategic cooperation to the United States, that both countries respectively increase their own bargaining power. For example, the North Korea now remain a very difficult task to discuss with the with the United States. At the same time, China also have many issues between United States and China herself. For example, South China Sea issue, East China Sea issue, Taiwan issues, and even the trade negotiation between China and the United States. So the Chinese government also wants to increase their own bargaining power through the third summit with Kim Jong-un this time.
Kim Jong-un, as you said, it's his third visit, but do you think it's now time for Xi Jinping to go to Pyongyang maybe?
I think so, because it is highly possible, because already the chairman Kim Jong-un visited Beijing 3 times. And I think this is, now it is the President Xi Jinping's turn to visit Pyongyang. But we also think of it, probably in September, there will be held Russia's 2018 EEC, Eastern Economic Forum. In that case, probably not only bilateral summit, but also trilateral summit among Russia, China, and North Korea, can be possible.
But I guess, and then you're saying timing could be a bit of an issue of when Xi Jinping would go to Pyongyang, I guess.
Probably end of this year, or there will be some choices like the important political occasion of North Korea. But the Chinese government never, the top leader visited or attended the North Korea's own political events, political occasion. So probably we don't know, but end of this year, probably it will be a best time to meet again.
How big a deal would it be if Xi Jinping goes to Pyongyang? Just understand, because he doesn't really travel that much. And then would it matter if he didn't go?
Oh, I think it does not really matter between the two countries, because if the current 3 times of a summit between the two countries, that does not mean the two countries, the strategic trust has increased, but they need each other's, they need each other, because they need to increase their own strategic influence over the Korean Peninsula. So whether they meet or not, the summit will be held end of this year or not, even President Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang or not, it doesn't matter. The two countries need each other strategically to cope with U.S. Huge influence over the Korean Peninsula.
So Kim Jong-un has met with Xi Jinping now multiple times, but he's also now started to make a relationship with President Trump of the U.S., having that summit last week. He seems to be rebuilding relations on both sides. But how difficult, what kind of challenges do you think there'll be for Kim Jong-un to maintain that kind of relationship with both sides?
Frankly, it is a very difficult job for Kim Jong-un, because now the U.S. and China is under very intensified strategic competition in the region. So probably the chairman Kim Jong-un will be very difficult to satisfy China and the United States at the same time. But we have to think of it. His grandfather, Kim Il-sung, was used the former Soviet Union and China's relationship competitions. During the competitions of the 2 big superpowers in the communist bloc, the Kim Il-sung, North Korea's paramount leader, used those competitions, and he increased his own, North Korea's own interest. In my understanding, Kim Jong-un also applying those pendulum diplomacy between China and the United States at the moment.
He seems to be making, Kim Jong-un seems to be making good signs towards the US at the moment. For example, he's moving moves at least on one of the parts of the June 12th declaration, which is the repatriation of the remains of the missing in action, the MIA soldiers from the Korean War. Expected to happen within the next few days, according to reports from the US. But how significant a step is this by Pyongyang?
I think it is a very significant and meaningful step to build up trust between the two countries. For example, this is very meaningful step not only to the Trump administration, but also to the U.S. society. U.S. citizens always eager to bring each single of remains of the U.S. soldiers. They can battle for the U.S. The values in every corner of the world. So this time it can be a very meaningful message from Pyongyang to the U.S. citizen directly. But I hope this time there will be no tricky issues on the returning remaining U.S. soldiers, because before it happened, but that time the North Korean asked the rewards, and even they got reward, but they
asked for
mingled.
cash, right? They asked for money to repatriate these soldiers.
Right, but they mingled with animal the bones with the remains of the U.S. soldiers. That can be very disappointed. If it will happen, there can be a very backdrop from the U.S. citizen. So I hope this time will be a very normal way to process.
Yes, I guess if it happens like that again this time, it would be 2 steps back from everything the step forward they've taken to try and build this relationship with Trump. It would be an insult almost.
Right.
But are you actually surprised about how quickly North Korea has acted to get these remains, to try and get these remains back to the US? Are you surprised at all how quickly they've been moving? Because in the past they would have dragged their feet maybe, but this is within a few days. Everything seems to be rolling. It seems to be, and it could happen within the next few days.
I think it is one good example of North Korea's pendulum diplomacy. After June 12 summit with President Trump, after 1 week, around 1 week, the chairman Kim Jong-un visited and held a summit with President Xi Jinping. But at the same time, even though he visited Beijing this time, but at the same time, the chairman Kim Jong-un showed his goodwill to the U.S. society that is returning the remains of the U.S. soldiers. So it is very typical of the pendulum diplomacy works.
So right now, swinging towards the good relations with the U.S. for now, I guess.
Right, even though he close to the one big country, but at the same time, he protect the other side's country's interest or needs.
So returning the remains was one of the points of the June 12th declaration, but perhaps one of the more bigger ones is still about denuclearization.
Right.
And Washington last week hinted that talks with North Korea would continue this week, but it hasn't happened yet, and it looks like it's not going to happen this week. What do you think about the fact that it's not happening this week? Should we be concerned that talks are already stalling at this point?
In my understanding, it is a kind of a war of nerve between the two countries. It's a push and pull in South Korean expression. Probably the chairman Kim Jong-un first discussed about a core agenda and the result of the summit between Kim Jong-un and President Xi Jinping. Based on the result, China and North Korea probably will discuss and coordinate their own strategic interest of the Korean Peninsula. So for Kim Jong-un, first discuss with President Xi Jinping. And second, it is a very hard task remained. The first of all, in the big picture, probably it is comparatively easy to reach an agreement between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. But the left issues, that is verifying process and even the irreversible process, it can be a very difficult issues. So probably Kim Jong-un need more time to concern about it, consider about it.
Do you think both sides are still like considering things?
Probably U.S. already
out?
ready for the fast track and fast discussion with North Korea, but North Korea need time to consider more carefully this time.
I guess North Koreans are feeling the pressure a little bit from considering everything that's going on with the U.S. as
yes,
well.
and even though they want to China work some key player role that can increase North Korea's bargaining power in future negotiation with United States.
Yes, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Thank you for coming in today and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much.
Now that brings us to the end of our show. Remember to stay tuned to Arirang for more news updates throughout the day. Thank you for watching though, and hope you join us again next time. Goodbye.
The city of Cheonan is the center of Korea's transportation. Surrounded by delicate rolling hills, it is near the cutting-edge factories of Korea's high-tech manufacturing sector. But Cheonan is also treasured by Koreans because of its association with the long battle for independence from Japan.